for me to handle. So I decided to find out if she wanted to go into a community,
Right.
and that's what happened. We were
Which,
told that there was going to be a 14-day quarantine once she moved in,
yep.
and after that move in occurred, everything started changing. The lockdown was extended from 14 days to indefinite. And what that means is that people who want to visit their loved ones in a senior community cannot do so. They can't enter the senior community unless they're considered an essential worker. And the loved ones aren't allowed to leave the community unless they're going for a medical visit. And in some cases, that medical visit has to include official medical transport. Otherwise, they have to go under quarantine when they return, which means they can't leave their own apartment for 14 days. And such is the problem that my mother is undergoing right now, because if I help her leave, if I'm the one that transports her to and from her doctor's appointment, when she gets back, she has to go back into a quarantine, which means she can't leave her room for 14 days,
Right.
which is fucking asinine.
Well, and it's unhealthy. It's absolutely unhealthy, especially when you're dealing with people that have dementia, Alzheimer's, any kind of cognitive and mental decline, particularly. We do understand that they are an at-risk population. However, what other, you know, risk to benefit is the way that I would look at it.
Well, the way they're weighing the potential negative impacts on the resident are a real head scratcher. They seem to be obsessed with preventing COVID, but at the expense of everything else. Like,
Right.
they don't care about mental health. They don't care about depression. There's been a couple of cases of suicides inside these communities,
I believe it.
and suicide in general has skyrocketed.
Yep.
We know of two suicides just within our circle of people that we know within the last 2 weeks.
And I know of 4 since June.
Since all the stuff got crazy.
Yeah.
So, my question for these people, these lockdown enthusiasts, especially with the senior communities, is if employees can come and go freely, and if certain kinds of service providers or essential workers can come and go freely, what makes those people any less likely to carry the virus or transmit the virus than these other assholes that have an ID card and work there? Whether it's the cable guy, the plumber that's fixing something with the dishwasher, or an employee of the community, or any other person for that. What makes them less likely to cause an infection?
Nothing.
Because, and see, that's where the fallacy in the logic. It's not about infection control. I don't know what it's about, but I think it's more about liability protection, because they're afraid that if somebody does get this thing,
Right.
that the families are
Well,
going to sue them.
and I know from what I've seen or heard from my family up in the Midwest, there was a true issue where nursing homes had instances where a resident had become infected, and then it just ran rampant. And before they knew it, they had lost 44 residents. So
Are you talking about in New York?
no, this was in Indiana.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one nursing home. There's been a few that and unfortunately it does spread like wildfire, because a lot of them have, aside from their age, they do have a lot of comorbidities and stuff
Well,
like that.
that's lethality. You're talking about the infectious nature of it, which is different.
Yeah.
It is infectious,
Yeah.
just like the common cold, just like influenza. but this one is new, and it basically creates pneumonia. I mean, that's how it kills old people, right? They have some kind of a immune deficiency or other comorbidity, and all of a sudden they have pneumonia, and it gets them, and they die. But I actually looked up the stats, and they've been revised significantly downward. Originally, back in March, they were saying that 8.6% of infected people 70 to 80 were going to die. That number has turned out to be like 4%,
Right.
which means that the survival rate for the infected
Is less than the flu.
it's less than the flu. So 96% survival, and that's among people who are symptomatic. So there's a certain amount of that population, although lower than most, that will be asymptomatic. So you could probably
Right.
even throw another couple percentage points out there if you really want the real number. Now, I don't know too many people that get the flu and don't feel it. I've never heard of the asymptomatic flu. Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's a thing. It could be.
It actually is. Oddly enough, that's something that I have seen in the rapid PCR testing. Some of that research is the actual rapid COVID PCR assay that's run to test in a lot of medical facilities here locally, at least that I know, and I'm sure that the same test is run in other facilities as well, has honestly a whole breakdown of different things that it actually tests for: influenza, para-influenza, influenza A and B, HIV.
Is this the screen grab that the guy was arguing with you about on Twitter?
Yes, that I don't understand how the testing works. Thank you. You have since been blocked on Twitter
Yeah,
because.
by the way, Jasmine Starr knows what she's doing. I'm not going to tell you where she works, and she's not going to tell you where she works, but trust me, she knows about infection control. She knows about testing. She understands how the testing works. She understands the
I've administered the testing.
Yeah, but you also understand the chemistry behind it. You know
Right.
what they're doing in the lab in order to come up with. You know what
Right.
the test results share in common. You know what RNA
And I've
is.
seen the trend of, and I'll tell you, folks, since the beginning, and one of the things is it changes all the time. First we're only testing people that come in that are symptomatic, and then we're going to test everybody. Well, then, holy hell, what happens? We drive our numbers way up. So then, in order to have people return to work, we're testing them to return to work, and they have to have this negative test. Well, even though they've already recovered from the initial illness, if they were indeed sick, which people had been, the RNA that is collected can actually survive in the nose and nasal passages for 70 plus days. So each time that somebody was being retested, that
Even though they were better.
even though they were better and had recovered, they were asymptomatic at that point. And according to, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, according to Fauci, but
What is that hand gesture? What do you?
I think anybody that, whatever, people can take that as they want to, but according to him, he'll even say in some of the stuff that if they are asymptomatic, they are not contagious. There was just a video released of him saying that. That being said, each time somebody would retest, they were being counted as a new positive.
Yep, which is just another fraud on the pile of so many frauds that have happened on this entire thing.
Right. So now the new thing is we are going to do less testing. Because if somebody has been...
Because the tests are 50% bullshit to begin with. They're 50% unnecessary at that. When you start dividing out all of the all of
Right.
the
And
statistical abnormalities with the testing, you get this error rate of like 80%. It's
well,
ridiculous.
and then, and then we had the case where we had the kid that was on talking about somebody who didn't even take the test that received a phone call that they were positive. I mean, what,
Yeah.
folks? It's a shit show.
It's a shit
It
show.
it
So
is.
and so getting back to the nursing home situation. Um, so what they're saying is it's got a 97% or higher survival rate among the infected with active symptoms. Okay, the symptomatic infected, and that's according to WebMD, and I guess that's somewhat reliable. Their numbers are quite a bit different from the original
Yeah.
numbers predicted by the CDC.
Yeah. The numbers have definitely, and the CDC will actually acknowledge that, and actually, I want to say in the convention speech last night.
The president's speech.
Yes, that he actually even said that the projected numbers and how they had been lower than they had anticipated. And
Yeah, way lower.
yes,
So, 97% survival rate. Most people would say that this is a generally survivable illness, right?
yeah,
97%. I wish my grade point average was 97% when I went to school.
mine
I'd be
was
making a
or
lot more
more.
money. But so if it's generally survivable, then the people that are making these policies about lockdowns are basically saying that the suffering of a generally survivable infection is more important than the deprivation of family for 6 months and counting. And a lot of these people have not seen their children, their spouses, in many cases, for upwards of 6 months. The people making these policies are fucking crazy.
Yeah,
They just recently announced what the parameters of a easing of the lockdown might consist of, and
I read that. Yep.
it all hinges on nobody, no resident or employee testing positive using the nasal RNA test for 14 consecutive days before they'll lift the lockdown for that individual facility. And then the moment any of those population tests positive again, back into lockdown again for 14 more days. That is insane.
Right. I agree with you, because as it's been demonstrated, the negative effect on the mental health and mental decline of not just the general population, but the population that is at risk. We're doing them a huge disservice in some ways by limiting their contact with family members.
Well, depression is a comorbidity as far as mental health is concerned, right? So if you have, let's say you're a depressed individual and then this shit happens,
Right.
that's going to exacerbate
Absolutely.
your lack of mental health at that point. But there are actually quite a few lawsuits pending right now of people who are going after the government. And I'm actually kind of fairly impressed with this piece that I found on USA Today, which is a recent one.
I just love the first word there, even.
What's that?
Draconian.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yes, it's a lovely word.
But that kind of describes, like, people don't understand what that actually means. And you can tell that even by reading. This is not an opinion piece, so they have to put.
Right.
You see how it's in quotes, the word draconian,
Yes.
and there's question marks. Draconian, house arrest, like. Don't put a question mark. That's exactly what it is. It is house arrest. And I'm telling you, like, I can tell my personal story with this because I went
Wow.
when I go visit my mom, I have to sit outside on a bench
Right.
in order
That's-
to be with her personally, in order to give her a hug. And I'm constantly harassed about wearing a mask outside and that I'm not supposed to be there visiting. I went there to fix her iPhone, which broke.
Right. Her only source of communication to the outside world.
Right, her only way to communicate with friends and family. I take my laptop, I take my cord, I get her iPhone. I'm sitting there on the bench with her iPhone hooked up, trying to wipe it and reload it. And meanwhile, the people from the nursing community are arguing about what to do with me. Should we call the police? Should we do this?
What?
Should we do that? And I'm just like, they're not going to do anything because I'm not. There's no law that I'm breaking. If they want to kick me out, they can try. But I'm here to fix my mom's laptop. And the reason that that's okay, logic, is because every cable guy, every geek squad, every plumber, anybody that goes into these residences is an essential worker and is admitted into those residences, no questions asked, in order to fix things and provide services. So you've got people that are coming in, as long as they're designated as essential, they're allowed in.
Well, and here's, I'm going to shoot off of this because this is where I wanted to do a little bit more study up on the executive order for the right to try.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I don't know exactly what it means, but I
Right.
think what he's saying is it's code language for, yeah, if you want to use HCQ, you can.
Right. So, kind of bouncing off of some of that, you get into patient rights, and as a patient, you have the right to refuse any kind of treatment that you want. And we're essentially, I don't want to say we because I'm not, I don't work at that facility, but limiting contact that is negatively having an impact on, and though they are residents, they are clients, they are patients,
And they're
they
people.
have medical problems and they have medical needs. Now, they have the right to refuse any treatment that they want, and that
Or any test
also
or any exam.
includes, I don't see how it can't include being in lockdown.
Yeah, well,
They're
yeah,
they're
that's a good point.
assuming
Yeah.
they're
Especially,
assuming that
so
risk.
is lockdown, the first question is whether or not they think lockdown is medically necessary for an individual, right?
Well, and they
whether
have
or
the
not
right.
and whether or not that person is acting of their own recognizance and in either agreeing with or disagreeing with the lockdown. Now, I will tell you that these senior communities have leases that are 10 inches thick, and they're allowed to do whatever they want because you're entering into a private agreement with them. And if they say lockdown, then you're going to lock down. But the point is, it's destructive.
Yeah.
And if they say, well, what is this doing to people medically? What is it doing to them, to their mental health, to have them locked down? How is this decision, is this policy harming them?
So what
And their reaction to that is going to be, well, we're not a medical institution.
so what is it that
We're a housing facility. That's what they say. That's what they rest their laurels on. That's why they don't have immunity, right? Because you can't sue a hospital for catching something at the hospital unless there's gross negligence.
that's not true.
I mean, you can sue anybody for anything. It doesn't mean you're going to win, though. Is my point. And
Oh,
that, I don't think
I
that would be any
mean, we
different in
won't
this
get
case.
into like hospital acquired infections and stuff like that. But that's where essentially the hospital will eat the bill if they are the cause of an infection while somebody is there. But what is the other part of this where you were mentioning that there were going to be some changes?
Well, the essential change there is that they're saying here's the conditions for ending the lockdown policy. And those conditions are basically based on a 14-day testing cycle with a 14-day quarantine that occurs whenever a positive comes back for either a resident or an employee. Now, my argument there is, well, wait a minute. What if somebody brings in, if all their rationale is accurate about how infectious and deadly this thing is, which, by the way, it's not, then they're expecting everybody to believe that they're going to test all of the Best Buy Geek Squad kids that come in to fix grandma's remote control.
Right.
I don't think so.
Well, I believe that I don't know the specific source, but one of the big sources of news sources in the UK just published an article which they were saying lockdown and shutdown was a huge mistake. And
Those kinds
in
of articles
grand
are everywhere.
grand proportions.
I think you can ask anybody on the street if they think lockdown is a good idea. Most people are going to say no, it's ridiculous. I can't wait for it to be over with.
Except for Karens.
Except for Karens. By the way, Precious Frito is on the live chat. Hi, Precious Frito.
Yo, Precious Frito.
Thanks for finding us tonight. I wonder if Precious Frito watched the RNC last night.
I would bet that he did.
Did you watch the President, Precious Frito? Let us know.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a little bit of this article. These are about the lawsuits triggered by apparent civil liberties violations like what we've just described with the lockdown. Campaigning in Scarborough, Maine, gathering for church in Chincoteague, Virginia, or just grabbing a burger at Poopy's Pub and Grub in Savannah, Illinois. Yeah, they had to do that. I swear these journalists have the dumbest sense of humor. Poopy's Pub and Grub.
I'm sorry.
Can we get them as a sponsor just so I can say Poopy's Pub and Grub all the time?
Oh my gosh. I went in Savannah, Illinois. Please tell me that they sell t-shirts.
I bet you they do. Yeah, let's definitely order one.
Maybe we can barter a t-shirt deal with them.
Each of these activities has become the subject of a federal lawsuit as residents, businesses, and even lawmakers challenge state shutdown orders designed to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. The cases test where the lines are safely drawn as governors balance protecting public health against individual liberties. Governors say strict rules save lives, but critics who are forced to stay home or shutter their businesses call the steps draconian and compare them to house arrest. Again, both words in quotes. The lawsuits come as President Donald Trump has become increasingly vocal in criticism of state restrictions, encouraged protests at state capitals, and urged churches to reopen despite restrictions.
Oh, wait. Whoa. They're saying he encouraged protests at state capitals?
Well, yeah, he encouraged lockdown protests, and there were a number of them a couple months ago, especially in Michigan. There were some big ones in Michigan, where people were actually protesting right outside the governor's mansion and stuff. It says more than 1,300 state and federal lawsuits have been filed over COVID-19, including 240 dealing with civil rights as of Friday, according to Hunt and Andrews Kurth, a law firm tracking the cases. Now, this article is over 2 months old, so I got to think that there's going to be more.
Well, and imagine now if that's a statistic from a couple months ago, and the more information that has been, studied and received and everything, that is definitely, I'm sure, going to contribute to that number escalating as well.
So, when I went to find articles supporting my issue here, which is I think that the lockdown should end and these lawmakers should pay. It should be a punitive measure that where they're something is taken away from them for enforcing this shit on everybody. I went and I used the search phrase lawsuits filed to end lockdowns. And I went to Google, of course, and I got 3 or 4 pages deep, and all the stories were about people suing nursing homes because their residents caught COVID-19. Not one of them was a hit with a news story about the exact phrase that I typed in, which is lawsuits filed to end lockdowns. Then I went over to DuckDuckGo and did the same search, and it was filled with them.
I'm sure.
So that's just another feather.
Censorship.
Yeah, it is exactly that. So USA Today reviewed more than 80 lawsuits that often dealt with conditions at prisons and nursing homes, voting rights, and university tuition. USA Today focused on legal challenges to restrictions such as stay-at-home orders and business closures, and also whether abortion or church services can be limited during the pandemic. Abortion was not limited during the pandemic, as far as I know, while church services
No, because you
were.
need fetal cells in order to help make vaccines.
Are we going there?
Not tonight,
okay.
but...
Thank you. I'm not ready for that one. My head's already going to explode here. Yep, exactly right. This is a good chance or a good moment to probably talk about some of the upgrades that we did to the studio.